This story tells of a world that has undergone incredible changes and turned into something very scary and incomprehensible. Our main character has a wonderful and beautiful daughter. Everything would be perfect if she hadn't decided to side with the darkness and destroy everything around her. Her father, Seo-jun Lee, cannot understand why she did this, although it seemed to him that he had raised her with completely different principles. Sora no longer respects her father. She considers him too weak and no longer wants to play the daughter-father game. He probably came here to destroy her and justify his title as a hunter, or perhaps just to understand her motive. At this moment, he was called by an experienced hunter named Kamen, who reminded Lee that she was no longer a little girl but a real monster. Lee completely disagrees with these words. For him, she will always remain his beloved daughter, no matter what. Sun said that he did not want to encourage anyone to kill, so he allowed his soldiers to turn back and was left alone with Lee. The situation quickly began to spiral out of control. Lee pulled out a gun and said he would fight for his daughter. He doesn't care that she's turned into a real devil. He'll do everything he can to stop her. He understands that he has failed as a father and feels absolutely unnecessary to Sora, just like to Sun. He is ready to die here and now, simply because he feels he is fighting for the right values. He cannot watch his own daughter be murdered, and so he decides to risk his life, no matter what. The result was natural. After just a few seconds of fierce battle, Lee fell to the ground and lost consciousness. His daughter couldn't move for a long time. It seemed as if she was hypnotized and didn't understand what was happening. Sora hated her father, but now her attitude toward him had changed. She decided to act very decisively. Thus, the final boss began the last quest on planet Earth, although at that moment no one understood anything yet. The dying Lee was sad and dreamed of another chance to change everything that had happened and start his journey over. He had no idea that he would soon have this opportunity, because the unique quest of the hunter Lee had begun. He must change the future. Before the regression, he saw everything that happened to him in the past. All these emotional moments were as clear as the palm of his hand. All those times he treated his daughter badly, and the difficult moments of losing his beloved wife. He saw his daughter grow up to hate him and began to wonder what had caused this terrible future. After that, darkness fell. Soon, he opened his eyes and realized that he was in his room. Lee couldn't understand anything. He remembered perfectly how he had died yesterday at the top of the mountain, but now he was still alive. He immediately took his phone out of his pocket and realized that he was in the past, because today was May 21st, 2025. He looked in the mirror and couldn't believe his eyes. It was really true. He wasn't dreaming. His regression had begun. So far, he doesn't understand how he was able to return to the past or why he got this chance to change everything. At that moment, the door to his room opened and he saw his beloved wife, whom he had not seen for many years. Next to her stood the still very young and small Sora, the girl who would make this world suffer many years later. The system immediately informed the hunter that a unique quest to change the future had begun. He must change 5 of Sora's accidents. He remembers the situation perfectly. In the past, the conversation was not very pleasant and ended in a scandal. His wife tried to assure him that it was his daughter, but Seo-jun refused to believe it. He said he didn't even want to look at this little creature until he saw proof of paternity. It was at this moment that he first broke his daughter's little heart, but in the future he would repeat past mistakes more than once. Now he understands how stupid he was in his youth, and now he has no right to do everything the same way. He must stop Sora's 5 accidents and prevent this child from growing into a cruel monster who will destroy the entire world. The problem is that he doesn't know what these 5 accidents are, but he'll have to be very careful if he wants to change everything. Only now did he begin to understand that they had no good memories at all from the moment they met. Not only did Lee not recognize her as his child, but he also failed Kira, who loved this child until her death. After all this, he was forced to take care of Sora on his own, but he was too busy feeling guilty and regretful. When Kira died, he tried to work all the time and pay off the family's debts, so Sora grew up alone with no one to take care of her. It's probably obvious now that the reason this little lady became a witch was her father. Sora couldn't even call him her father. He had been so stupid and unaware. This time he is ready to change. From the very beginning, he will admit that Sora is his daughter despite the lack of evidence. After that, he invited Kira and his daughter to his home because he understood that they were very tired after the long journey. He must become a real father to this little princess, otherwise his quest will fail and the regression will be meaningless. The first step has been taken. Let's be honest, Lee has every chance to become a great father and change the future from the very beginning. Kira realized that this guy had changed. He used to live like a pig, and yet today, in just a few hours, he cleaned the entire house. He's even ready to play with his daughter, even though this is only their first meeting. Lee decided to talk and find out why Kira only came today. She could have done it much earlier. The reason is that they parted on a bad note, and this woman only found out about her pregnancy when Lee was called up for the army. At first, she was confident that she could raise the child alone, but then she realized how difficult it was and decided to seek help. There was an accident, their house burned down, and now they have nowhere to stay for the night. Kira doesn't ask Lee to take all the responsibility. She understands that she gave birth to the child of her own free will. She just wants the opportunity to live with Lee for a while, because she can't bear to spend the night with a small child on the street. The judge agreed very quickly. He did it even faster than the skin had time to finish. Lee's house is not very big, but if he removes the unnecessary trash, there will be room for another family. It must be admitted that this guy is really changing quickly. He used to be immature and problematic, but now he has completely changed. After that, he even smiled and decided to propose to Kira in order to form a full-fledged family. To put it mildly, Kira was not entirely happy with this proposal. She couldn't believe that people could change so much in such a short period of time. Lee believed that Sora was his daughter, and at the first opportunity he led her into his home, and now he is also proposing marriage. He does this because he understands that if he doesn't do it now, he will regret it for the rest of his life. Today is the day when he must take responsibility for everything he did in his past life. His heart burns with the desire to make things right. After Kira died, it became clear how important a person she was to him. After that, his heart became dark and empty forever. Kira replied that it was too early to talk about it. She came here not because she had problems, but because she loved him. She is grateful for the opportunity to live in this house with her daughter, but it's better not to talk about the wedding yet. And the answer was obvious. Lee didn't even expect anything else. He knows that he will have to make much more effort to win this woman. Now he needs a plan. He needs a huge amount of money to raise Sora, and he also needs to remember to eat something and feed Kira. Kira said that she wanted to join one of the guilds to earn money. Only now did Lee remember that this was one of the reasons for Sora's misfortunes. Kira wants to become a hunter and therefore asked Lee to take care of her daughter. This is very interesting because in the past life, everything was completely different. This regression becomes more interesting with each passing minute. Let's go back 25 years. These events take place 10 years before the current moment. In one moment, the world changed radically for everyone on Earth because an incredibly terrible catastrophe occurred, one that no one could have predicted. Demons and monsters emerged from portals into dungeons and wanted to bring this world to total destruction, to give humanity no chance. It seemed that nothing could be changed. All that was left was to accept one's death calmly and with dignity. But it turned out that it was still too early to think about the end of the world. Even in the most difficult times, one can always find hope for salvation. There were people who were able to use the mana that entered this world from the spatial portals in the dungeons. These people transformed this mana into power. It was these brave warriors who were able to use this power to defeat the incredible monsters of the dungeon. Therefore, they began to be called hunters. That very morning, the weather was wonderful outside. Kira woke up and set off on important business. She was looking for the main guild building to try to do what she had been thinking about for the past few weeks. She had previously received a contract from one of the central guilds but had not yet signed it. There were many benefits and cash bonuses in this contract, so she was incredibly interested in the opportunity. Lee said that hunter contracts are imperfect and full of pitfalls. The guilds are luring young hunters into a trap. They make a lot of money from this, and that's why they do such things. So Lee advised Kira not to take any risks. It's not that simple. If she doesn't sign the contract, she won't be able to pay off her debts and become the master of her own life. He assured her that he was ready to teach her how to hunt monsters on his own so she could contact him at any time. Now, it's obvious that this guy has changed. He's not the same boy she met many years ago. When Kira and Lee broke up, he reminded her of a small child with whom it was impossible to agree on anything. Now he can put Sora to bed on his own. It seems like his parental instinct has awakened. Surely any man's life changes after he becomes a father, and that's exactly what happened to Lee. Not only did Kira set off on errands early in the morning, but Lee also woke up and took his daughter for a walk. They decided to try delicious ice cream at a shop near their house. Although Lee spent time with his daughter, he is still thinking about Kira and the guild that offered her the contract. He is familiar with this guild and its methods. They encourage hunters with various bonuses and then trap them. It becomes impossible to get out of this. It was this guild scheme in a past life that led Lee into huge debts. Because of this, he had to spend many years on the battlefield. Kira ended up in almost the same position. She was under the influence and pressure of the guild her entire life and met death before she could reach her full potential. Her death was a heavy blow for his daughter, perhaps one of Sora's 5 great misfortunes. Now they need to try to think positively and change their lives for the better. Lee has been doing well from the very beginning. His daughter looks happy. In the past, it was hard to spot her with a big smile on her face. Sora has also improved her bond with her father. She offers him ice cream and wants him to taste the delicacy as well. The girl had never called him father until today, probably because he was home too little and almost never spoke to her. Lee didn't create their memories together. He left her alone even when she needed him most. The first and last time she called him father was when she begged him to save her. These are terrible memories that make his heart bleed, but fortunately they are behind him now. Only today did he find out that Sora likes ice cream, which probably illustrates perfectly how bad a father he had been. In such moments, he understands how little time they spent together in their past lives. He wants not only to complete his quest, but also to create as many happy memories as possible with his daughter. They now have everything they need to live a happy life and change the future, although that doesn't mean everything will be perfect. Suddenly, everyone around heard a very loud sound, and the experienced hunter immediately realized that a rift had appeared somewhere nearby. Normally, such events are warned about in advance using the latest atmospheric scanning technologies. Hunters usually arrive in the zone much earlier than the monsters appear in our world, but this rift happened unexpectedly. The probability of such a crack appearing in space is very small. It didn't happen in his past life, so he had to act very quickly. At this point, Lee began to think about the legendary butterfly effect, where the movement of a butterfly's wings can cause a storm in another part of the world. Kira, who had never trusted her daughter with anyone else, left her with her father, and because of that, everything around her began to change. This happened due to his interference in the timeline. Now the change cannot be avoided. All that remains is to adapt. He tried to take his daughter and escape to a safe place, but it turned out that he had arrived at the rift from the gorge into the other world, from which emerged the Creton Bull, a huge titan monster that is extremely difficult to stop. If this monster had crossed Lee's path in a past life, it would have destroyed him in a matter of minutes. But now he is just an ordinary person. The only thing he's capable of is escaping from the monster, and even that doesn't guarantee success or his child's safety. He realized that he would have to be separated from his daughter for a while. He asked her to hide in a safe place and not come out until he gave her permission. Very quickly, the boy began to realize that this monster was only targeting him and didn't care about other people around. He had no weapons to protect himself, only various junk lying nearby. He remembered how Harry Potter could fly on a broomstick and tried to replicate something similar in his situation. The result was not very successful, but if Lee is still alive, then everything is going according to plan. He was able to survive because he surrounded his body with mana, although there is a limit to everything, and he won't always be lucky. There was no way to escape now, and after the siren stops, he would have to wait 5 minutes for experienced hunters to arrive. These 5 minutes would stretch out and feel like an eternity, but if he survived, Sora would be saved. He had every chance of saying goodbye to his life, but he must endure even if he had to spend every last drop of mana. At the beginning of his journey in a past life, he was too weak to become a full-fledged hunter. Because of this, other fighters left him far behind, and his insecurity grew with each passing day. During those difficult days, he tried to find a way to survive and studied absolutely all the books about monsters. Now Lee knows that the bull's weak point is its eyes, so he must strike at that area at all costs. He will no longer allow Sora to live a bad life. He must change everything. He has no other choice. With such a weak body, it was impossible to gather enough mana, but his blow still proved powerful and very accurate. Because of the huge bull, everything around began to collapse. He had never met such a devil in his past life. Only a little later did Lee see that Sora was in mortal danger. The house she was standing next to was about to collapse. The little girl began to panic and cry. It seemed to her that nothing could save her. But her father managed to protect her with his body. He appeared before her like a real superhero she had read about in comics, a situation that would forever be etched in her memory. In order to save his daughter, and before that, to destroy the Creton Bull, he had to spend too much mana. Lee was left completely without energy. He understood that he must get up and take his daughter to a safe place, but his body refused to listen to him. Soon, people in unusual costumes began to appear in the problem area. It was ordinary people in unusual costumes who arrived to rescue bystanders and take control of the situation. Lee knew he could trust them. He saw the mark on their suits and realized they were experienced hunters. When he opened his eyes again, he was in the city's central hospital. As soon as Kira heard what had happened, she left work immediately and rushed to the hospital. She was terribly worried about Sora and Lee, and was incredibly relieved to find them both alive and well. Sora proudly told her mother that her father had saved her life, and Kira couldn't help but shed a few tears. A little later, they all went outside for coffee. Sora fell asleep, and Lee and Kira finally had a moment alone. Kira thanked him for saving their daughter. Lee insisted that everything had been under control and that nothing terrible had happened, though he admitted something strange had occurred during his fight with the bull. Someone had seemed to use ice magic, and he was sure it had been Sora. When he told Kira this, he saw fear flash across her face, as if she had dreaded this conversation her whole life. Kira protested that Sora couldn't even speak the word magic, so there was no way she had cast any spells, but Lee quickly realized that Kira was hiding something. He assured her that he could be trusted and that there was no point in keeping secrets. At that moment, it became obvious that Kira now trusted him completely and was ready to share the truth. She admitted that their daughter had indeed learned to use magic and that everything with the bull now made sense. The difficult conversation followed. It turned out that when Kira lost her house, it was because Sora had completely lost control of her power and accidentally destroyed their home. Right now, there was nothing to be done about the past, but if others found out, their daughter could be taken to a lab for testing. Lee promised that he would protect Sora at any cost and that Kira need never worry about their future. He said he had never doubted that Sora was his daughter. Even without proof, he chose to trust her. In a past life, he would never have said such a thing. He would have refused any connection with the child. But now everything had changed. That change, Kira realized, was what made her see Lee differently. The weight of responsibility had transformed him into a true man. They decided to discuss the guild next. Kira explained that there were many hidden pitfalls in the contract that could lead to future problems. She refused the guild's offer and walked away. Although she seemed confident, she had no idea what to do next. Lee promised to teach her the skills of a hunter himself, including his own hidden techniques. Soon, Lee was discharged. Together with Kira and Sora, he went to his workshop, a modest house rather than a guild building, chosen to keep prices affordable. Inside, they found a vast array of high-quality weapons at fair rates. They were greeted by the blacksmith, an older man in excellent physical shape, whom Lee recognized from his memories before the time regression. In his past life, this master of iron had been known as the Lord of Iron. His name was Khan. Lee and Kira bowed respectfully and announced their desire to become hunters. Khan laughed, delighted by their proper greeting, and ushered them inside. Kira and Lee began choosing their weapons. To be successful, a hunter must have a weapon that will come to the rescue in dire moments. Lee believed a bow would be perfect for Kira. She knew how to concentrate and remain calm under pressure, making her an ideal archer. Khan offered her a few test shots, but she refused, saying she trusted Lee's judgment. When they saw the prices, they nearly fainted. It was all so expensive, but Lee assured them he could afford it. He had been saving for something special. He had already promised Kira he would help her become stronger, and now there was no turning back. Sora, watching her parents' conversation, decided to intervene. She offered to give up her ice cream allowance so they could afford the necessary weapons. On the surface, she seemed like an ordinary, kind, attentive child, but her mother knew how mature she was for her age. Perhaps this was the result of growing up poorly and never being denied anything after Kira and Lee's reunion. It was for her daughter's sake that Kira decided to become a hunter. It is a risky and dangerous profession, but one that pays quite well. Khan really liked this family, especially their beautiful daughter, so he decided to give a discount to his new customers. They would only pay for the materials for the weapon. The work of the craftsman himself would be free. Thus, the satisfied family left the store with new weapons, ready to move forward according to plan. Lee suggested that Kira train with him and then venture into the dungeons to act as a real team. Soon, they went to a training ground to improve their abilities. Kira, having watched all the Lord of the Rings movies, took inspiration from Legolas and now almost always hits her target with remarkable accuracy. Her progress was rapid. Sometimes she even managed to destroy trees with her arrows. Lee and Sora watched her training with pleasure. It seemed as though the whole family now shared a common goal. They even went to the store and brought food for Kira after her hard workouts because eating well and resting are essential after training. The training ground was ideal, located in a secluded area deep in the mountains. Lee had trained there before returning to the past, and now, in just a few weeks, he had taught the mother of his child all the basics of martial arts. They were able to practice thoroughly before heading into the dungeon, so now they were much better prepared for the upcoming challenges. Lee was especially surprised that Kira could pierce through a tree with ordinary arrows. It was as if she had been born with a bow in her hands. In the past, due to guild rules, Kira was forced to fight with a sword, though she had no talent for it. She constantly broke her sword in the middle of battle and failed repeatedly until she tried using a bow and discovered her true potential. They talked about using mana. Sora listened carefully to her parents and said that she also knew how to use it and could teach her mother. She kept repeating the word mana. Kira hardly suspected that her daughter could one day become a creature powerful enough to destroy the entire world. Soon, Sora demonstrated her talents. Her father noted how gifted she was but warned her to be more careful with her powers. The most important thing, he said, was to learn how to disperse her mana and not concentrate too much energy in her hands for her own safety. She would need constant monitoring, and someone had to be found to watch over Sora while her parents were in the dungeon. Lee assured Kira that he knew someone perfect for the job, so she need not worry. No matter how much he tried to use his knowledge from the past, not everything turned out as well as he'd hoped. He eventually went to his father to ask for help. Though this man was not inclined to assist his son, Lee had to tell him everything about Kira, their love, and the birth of their beautiful daughter. Lee also told him that he had proposed to Kira. They had started planning the wedding, but Kira had refused. He promised to tell his father all the details later. Regardless, Sora was his granddaughter. This man's name was Jae-won, and he couldn't resist that cute face and those big eyes. When he heard Sora call him Grandpa, he immediately melted like ice in the sun. Very quickly they agreed to cooperate, and Lee returned to Kira. Now they could calmly go about their business. The dungeon was waiting, but first, they needed to pick up the bracelets they had ordered a week ago. This bracelet contained the stone that Sora had found, also called the Light of Mana. While at the workshop, Sora had looked at different weapons and tried to choose one she liked. Khan had promised to give her one item of her choice, and that's why she had chosen a blue stone. At first, it seemed like she had only picked up some trash, but it turned out she had discovered something incredibly valuable. The mana light is a stone that begins to glow when it senses mana nearby. It is used to search for artifacts and is a rather expensive item. Sora gave the stone to her father. She had noticed he was interested in it and decided to thank him for saving her during the rift. Now the stone has been added to a bracelet that Lee will carry with him, hoping to benefit from its properties. While talking, Lee and Kira noticed a large crowd gathering nearby. Everyone looked excited. They were watching a real celebrity. The glamorous man's name was Song, a fairly well-known hunter and TV star. Many people knew of him because he had gained fame by promoting his guild on television. Some believed Song wasn't actually a talented hunter but had become popular solely because of his appearance. Lee didn't want to see this hunter again. Sun was the master of the Knights Guild, the same guild that had once pursued Cyrus over a debt. Lee, Kira, and Sora bought everything they needed and were about to leave, but just then, the dungeon began to collapse right in the shopping center. At first, it seemed like an earthquake, but people were already used to such occurrences because after sounds like these, terrible creatures often emerged from the abyss. It had become very dangerous in the middle of the mall. Thanks to his experience, Lee understood this was only the beginning. They couldn't afford to lose focus, only he had returned from the past, so it was obvious that Kira didn't fully grasp the danger. This was her first time. A dungeon had been created, and a special quest was being launched. The adventure they had waited for so long was about to begin. Both hunters braced themselves for what was to come. They must be prepared to fight incredibly cruel monsters, otherwise they will not survive in this hellish world. Their task is quite simple. They need to clear the dungeon, specifically the destroyed shopping center. People around them began to panic. The doors were locked, and no one could get out. A huge number of monsters had appeared, and Kira didn't quite understand how to clear the dungeon. Lee decided not to explain anything to her and immediately jumped forward into the danger. He saw a man who was about to be eaten by one of the stinking spiders, so he had to intervene and save the poor jewelry seller. Lee was sure that by uniting with the other hunters, it would be much easier to destroy all the monsters. He called out to Kira, asking her to come down and join him. Now they had to try to save as many people as possible before more hunters arrived. The monsters in the shopping mall varied greatly in size. Some spiders were even bigger than bears. It soon became clear that the legendary Darren was also present in the shopping center. This girl was a hunter who had fought monsters until the very end of the world, but she shouldn't be here now. Lee tried to understand why she was there and completely forgot that Kira was nearby, watching him. Snapping back to reality, he asked the people around him not to panic and to focus on survival. After his words, a real battle began. Professional hunters started destroying the monsters one by one. A huge amount of blood from these filthy creatures stained the surroundings, and the hunters showed why they were considered humanity's last hope. Within a few hours, the shopping mall was completely cleared. People were rescued, and the last monster was killed. For her first battle, Kira showed great potential and did an excellent job. Seo-jun had heard about this girl before. She had been discussed in the guild, which considered her one of the most promising young warriors in the city. The Knights Guild was confident Kira would sign a contract with them, but they were disappointed when she refused to cooperate. Now, Song approached her and thanked her for her help. He admitted that she fought like a true master of her craft. He was surprised when, instead of shaking Cyrus's hand, he shook Lee's as if Lee were her husband. Suddenly, they heard a woman scream. It turned out that a little boy had been badly bitten by spiders. If he received help quickly, he would survive. However, the exit would only open after the dungeon was completely cleared. To do this, the boss needed to be destroyed. As it turned out, Song was against this idea. He explained that the exit would open automatically after 24 hours, and with so few hunters present, going after the boss was too risky. He didn't want to enter a dungeon he knew nothing about and risk his life and reputation. Song decided to stay back with his guards, which greatly angered the other hunters who wanted to fight. He didn't care that a child might die. He only joined battles when there was a guaranteed way to retreat. Fortunately, there was still hope. One hunter was willing to risk her life. Darren agreed to go with Lee and Kira into the dungeon to try to defeat the boss. In the past, when this dungeon had first appeared, it was Darren and Sun who had cleared it. Before the dungeon gates opened back then, a conflict had arisen between them. Sun believed Darren took unnecessary risks. Darren had replied that she would risk anything for a child's life, because that's how she was raised. The decision was made quickly. They prepared to go into the dungeon to face the boss. Luminescent moss could be seen everywhere. It grows in the darkest parts of the dungeon. The members of the expedition quickly found common ground. It wouldn't be surprising if they became true friends. Darren proposed that a captain should be chosen before the battle to take on leadership responsibilities and offered herself for the role. Kira also said she was ready to be captain. To avoid offending anyone, they quickly decided to make Lee their leader. He was not only intelligent but also possessed strong leadership qualities and strategic thinking. Lee understood that he was dealing with a very cunning woman, Darren. She was doing everything she could to test and evaluate his abilities. He decided to accept the role of captain but chose to proceed cautiously. Drawing too much attention could cause problems later. He preferred to appear like an amateur for now. As they approached the center of the dungeon, everyone tensed. Instead of a typical boss, they saw something large and slippery. Normally, a slug wouldn't be considered a boss, since even a novice could defeat one, but this dungeon was an exception. They had to proceed very carefully, as slugs are sensitive to ground vibrations. Darren volunteered to go first and immediately jumped toward the danger. Kira decided to descend carefully using a rope but lost her balance and fell to the ground. At first, it didn't seem like a big problem. The slug was slow like a turtle, but this was the first mistake in the dungeon of the destroyed shopping mall. And in this place, a single mistake could cost someone their life. Less than 5 seconds passed before the monster approached the location of the vibration. Only at the last moment was Lee able to grab Kira and push her away from the monster's attack. It seemed like defeating the slug would be too easy, but when you see it with your own eyes, you realize that it's no ordinary snail at all. To defeat it, it's not enough to just sprinkle salt on it. You need to come up with something much more interesting and meaningful. The slug is completely blind. Its main power lies in sensing ground vibrations, so they had to fight it wisely. They were very lucky that their captain was an experienced hunter. Lee decided to immediately make a plan before descending into the dungeon. He explained that fire was the slug's weak point and that if they could break its shell even briefly, they could easily attack. Kira would stay behind and in case of danger protect her comrades and set the monster on fire. The problem was that the boss continued to attack constantly and there was no way to follow the plan as intended, so they needed to distract it. Darren was the only one on the team who could create an earthquake using mana, so she was ready to take on the distraction mission. This girl was truly talented. In terms of endurance, she was one of the best in the country. Sometimes she fought a bit too recklessly, but with the help of her talent, she avoided dangerous situations. She prepared to use the fatal break technique, a skill that would make her famous in the future. To use this move, she needed a sword, which was her main weapon. Lee remembered perfectly how in his past life he had observed this technique many times. She could destroy anyone with this blow. However, at this point in the timeline, her swordsmanship skills were still not perfectly refined, so she needed to continue training. Her most important virtue was her desire to improve and her ambition, and in that, she was undoubtedly the best. The slug recovered too quickly and the sword couldn't withstand the stress. The situation began to spiral out of control. It became clear that it was too late to attack, and if the other team members didn't intervene, Darren would be in serious trouble. At the last moment, Lee intervened and doused the slug with oil, a risky but clever strategy. The closer the slime is to its core, the stronger it is, and its acidity is much higher than that of other monsters. That's why the sword couldn't withstand the strain. First, they needed to reduce the strength of the outer shell, and the ideal way to do that was to set the monster on fire. The slug got angry very quickly after being doused in oil. This snail clearly didn't like to bathe. It was difficult to set it on fire, but for now, Lee distracted the monster, while Kira remained in its blind spot. This gave her the opportunity to ignite the creature. It was a perfectly executed strategy. Before the battle, Lee had warned Kira that if threatened, she would need to set the boss on fire using an arrow charged with mana. Kira started to panic, saying that she had never done anything like this before, but Lee assured her that everything would be fine, that her training had not been in vain. She had worked incredibly hard and pushed herself to her limits. Now her time had come. Kira had to believe in her own talent and take a step toward her dream of becoming a strong monster hunter. And she did it. Even when it seemed like nothing would work, she didn't give up on her dream. With the help of fire, the monster's outer shell became weaker. Now the core could be clearly seen. All that remained was to strike a well-aimed blow and send this bastard to hell, because that's where he belonged. The entire team had to unite in that difficult moment to make the final push. The core was very close, and if they destroyed it, the boss would die and the shopping mall dungeon would be cleared. Everything happened incredibly fast. Hardly anyone followed the plan. They relied on their intuition and reflexes, and it worked. The dungeon was soon cleared. However, the entrance remained blocked and the building was surrounded by journalists and police. According to experts, the dungeon would disappear tomorrow unless it was cleaned up sooner. The grandfather, who was holding Sora in his arms, looked incredibly worried. He understood that his son was risking his life at that very moment. Lee had earlier said that he and Cyrus were going for a walk to the shopping mall in the city center. That shopping center was called Darien. He had promised to return soon, but things did not go according to plan. Little Sora was also scared. Though she didn't fully understand what was happening, children have an incredible sense for when something is wrong. Soon, the entrance was opened and civilians began to emerge. The hunter Sung was the first to come out. Then, little Sora saw her mother and father ahead. She was incredibly happy, just like her grandfather. Everything ended wonderfully. Even though mom and dad were exhausted, they were alive and well, and that was what mattered most. The family was finally reunited, despite all the hardships and danger. That day, a happy ending waited them. As soon as Darren saw their daughter, she immediately fell in love with the little girl. She said she would definitely buy her a toy or some sweet candy next time. Little Sora was overjoyed to see her dad. She pointed at her grandfather and said that she had come with him. It was immediately clear that there would be a very serious conversation between father and son at home. But right now, it doesn't matter. The boy who was bitten by a spider was able to survive. He was very hurt and scared, but they managed to save him. The job of a hunter seems promising. It offers many privileges, but for that, one has to risk their life protecting people from monsters. Jae-won understood from the very beginning that his son had chosen a risky path. Now he would have to accept it, even if it wasn't easy. They are not officially hunters yet, but it's only a matter of time because they have already chosen what they will do in the future. They needed to decide who would look after their little daughter because it was too risky to take her on missions. They couldn't find a nanny, so they'd probably have to turn to Grandpa again. He promised he would be able to look after her in his free time. It wasn't difficult for him, especially considering that she was a very calm child. After that, he looked at Kira and said he wanted to talk to her in private. When they went into another room, the grandfather said that he was not going to force her to marry his son. He just wanted to understand if she liked Lee. At that moment, the girl began to recall everything that had happened recently. She remembered all those moments when he cared not only about her but also about their daughter, and her heart felt warm. She said that her attitude toward him was changing, and now he was revealing himself to be a completely different person. Grandpa was delighted to hear those words and said they must organize a wedding soon, though he was probably rushing things a bit. Jae-won understood perfectly well what this young lady had gone through. Even though she had already become a mother, she was still very young. When Sora was just born, no one supported Kira. Her parents had died many years ago, and Lee wasn't there during the most difficult moments in her life. Sometimes, Kira blamed herself for all of it. It seemed to her that because of her difficult personality, people around her abandoned her. She and Lee had a bad relationship, and she was the one who had initiated their latest conflict. The young mother was confident she could handle motherhood while also being a successful businesswoman. She wanted to raise her daughter and work full-time, but with a little experience, she understood that this was impossible. During those hard times, she thought about Lee a million times but tried to forget him and move on alone. As time passed, the hardships increased. One day, Sora became seriously ill and Kira thought about writing to Lee again. However, she didn't go through with it, hoping that her own energy would be enough for her child. The problems became more serious after Sora developed extraordinary abilities. Although the little girl hadn't yet learned to control them, many people wanted to take the young talent into their guild. At that moment, Kira realized that she would have to constantly protect her child from bad people. They agreed that Sora would not show her powers to anyone except her mother. Those were hard times and they went through many challenges. But now, all of that is behind them. Now she has support. She is no longer alone. Lee, as well as his father, are always ready to help her. She can now trust them and share some of the responsibilities because they are willing to help. Lee fully agrees with his father's position. He is no longer a child. By returning to the past, he wants to correct all his mistakes. Now they have a chance to build a strong and happy family. But for that, they'll need to work hard and be willing to meet each other halfway. The decision was made. They both had to do everything they could to get a hunting license, and Grandpa was ready to help her with that. When they returned home, they immediately went to bed. That night, Lee had a strange dream, though he wasn't sure it wasn't real. The city was in ruins and it was hard to see a single living creature. It wasn't surprising as it was incredibly cold outside. After walking a few meters, he saw a girl who looked very much like an adult Sora. He approached her and tried to understand why she had done this, why she gave him a chance to start over. He struggled to get the words out. It wasn't physical. It was more likely that he was simply too overwhelmed. He could only stand and stare at her face. Suddenly, Sora screamed, thinking her father was disrespecting her. She said she despised him and wasn't going to forgive him for everything he had done. It seemed like at that moment she might kill her own father, but then Lee opened his eyes and realized he was in bed. He had sweated from fear, but now it's all behind him. He's in the past, and he has the chance to correct all his mistakes. His little daughter came to wake him up and play. Soon Kira entered the room and said that today was a rest day, so there would be no training. After breakfast, Lee decided to check his balance. The money was running low, so something needed to be done. Once they get their hunting license, they will start earning a small profit, but it won't happen right away. There's still a lot of time before certification, so they needed to figure out how to make a living. Lee said that he and his daughter were practicing Sora therapy, a new teaching of Eastern doctors that is very beneficial. To perform this technique, you need to lie down on a soft bed and dream about something pleasant. Everything was perfect, but my mother doesn't like Oriental practices. At that moment, something incredible happened. Lee's balance was replenished. Darren had transferred him a large sum of money. It turned out that Kira also received the same cash bonus. They couldn't believe this really happened to them. It was decided to immediately call the girl and find out what happened. Maybe it was just a mistake. She explained that she had earned a lot of money from the Monster Corps, so she decided to share it with her teammates. After they get a license, they will be able to earn much more, and all this is just a nice bonus. She also said that the hunter exam would begin soon. It exists to assess the abilities of people who want to become hunters. Warriors who pass all the tests receive a license. They also earn the right to enjoy all the benefits of the profession. Each of them will feel recognized because professional hunters are highly respected figures in the community. Darren promised to come to the exam and support them. Lee thought it was strange. Maybe this girl had ulterior motives. Perhaps she wanted to invite one of them to her guild, which was actually a pretty good idea, since her guild is one of the best in the country. In any case, this was a big event for their family because now they didn't have to worry about money. Looking at each other, they immediately knew where to direct these unexpected bonuses earned from clearing the dungeon. Every father and mother wants their child to wear the best clothes, so the decision was made almost immediately. Soon, Sora was dressed in the latest fashion and wished her parents good luck on the exam. If they get a license, their lives will change for the better. But for that, they need to show all their talents. Darren agreed to stay with little Sora during the exam. She would replace her grandfather, who also deserved a rest. Lee had practiced so much that he hadn't left himself any time to prepare for the written portion. Still, he wasn't particularly worried and was confident that his experience would be enough to pass. Before returning to the past, he had failed this exam a huge number of times, but he always received the maximum number of points for the written part. His problem had always been the second stage, because due to a lack of strength, he constantly failed the physical tasks. When he finally got his license, it had felt incredible. He had truly earned the title of hunter. Kira, on the other hand, was incredibly nervous. It would be bad if she took the exam in that condition. So Lee decided to make a small wager. Whoever scored the lowest number of points on the written exam would have to fulfill the winner's wish. Kira quickly agreed to the condition, and now her nervousness turned into motivation. The operation to prevent Sora from becoming a thief had officially begun. To ensure their daughter didn't have to suffer 5 misfortunes in the future, it was necessary to lay the foundation for a happy childhood and youth. In Korea, there is a large house of swords. Today, important events for history were about to take place. The headmaster was informed that the certification of future hunters would begin today. That meant the master had to pack up and hit the road. He decided not to go by car but to walk instead. Particularly attentive viewers might recognize this man as Master Son, who would later play an important role in the battle against Sora. Let's return to the exam to become a professional hunter. Our main characters were able to successfully pass the written test. It turned out to be quite easy. Now they had to face an artificial monster. They were required to defeat it within a limited time and avoid getting seriously injured. Future warriors were being observed by representatives of various guilds. This was a great opportunity to show themselves at their best. A large metal monster quickly formed from a small ball, and it wouldn't be easy to deal with it. Many participants failed to pass this physical test. After succeeding in the written part, they thought they were already hunters, but now they were faced with a harsh reality. Some even began to surrender before the battle began, which disappointed the guild representatives. Soon, a holy sword master from Korea arrived at the exam. This was the first time he had ever been seen here, as he usually avoided crowded events. This legendary warrior's name was Sunon, and on the day the catastrophe began, he saved humanity from absolute destruction. After that, the hero founded a sword guild, and now the grove became famous throughout the world. His skills were second to none. As soon as people began talking about hunters, they immediately mentioned him. His presence was important. Rumor had it that he came here for his granddaughter. It was hard to believe, but Darren was really his greatest weakness. Soon he saw another little girl next to his granddaughter and was quite startled. He thought his granddaughter had given birth to a baby, but it turned out that it was just his friend's second daughter who needed to be looked after. Little Sora called him Santa Claus, and to be honest, he did look quite like him. After that, the conversation turned back to the exam. The Holy Sword Master was dissatisfied with this year's representatives. He said they were too weak. That was, until the 28th member of Team D passed the test in just 1 minute. Thanks to her hard training, Kira was able to easily overcome the physical task, and Lee immediately congratulated her. He congratulated her on her success. After that, it was his turn to face the Iron Monster. Now we would see what he was truly capable of in real combat. The guy looked determined and wanted to finish the test as quickly as possible, but a shadow of uncertainty crept under his skin. In his past life, he had often failed physical tests, so now it was very important to forget about the past and move forward. This was a chance to start over with a clean slate. But for some reason, Lee couldn't even move. The people around him thought he was scared, but only the Holy Sword Master understood that this guy was trying to analyze his opponent and the situation around him. At the last moment, when it seemed the monster would tear his head off, Lee easily dodged and avoided death. Having passed this test countless times in the past, he had learned the monster's weaknesses. There was a huge hole in its armor. All that remained was to use this knowledge and destroy his opponent. Everyone knows that the weak points of training monsters are their joints, but our main character knew something more than everyone else. He acted completely atypically and surprised the esteemed audience with his battle strategy. The guild representatives had almost fallen asleep watching the weak warriors, but now they were all awake and very attentive. No one could take their eyes off what was happening in the training arena. Lee was able to get the monster's core. He officially passed the physical test and destroyed the Terminator with ease. He did it in just 14 seconds, setting a new competition record. He immediately ran to Cyrus to celebrate their joint success. It was probably for the sake of these two hunters that Darren had called her grandfather to this exam. Of course, everyone can see an opponent's weak point, but thinking through a strategy from start to finish and obtaining the core is a completely different level. After they received their hunting licenses, it was time to celebrate their victory. The exam had drained all her strength, so Darren invited her friends over for a delicious dinner to restore her energy balance. She promised to pay for everything because she had recently cleared another dungeon and made a lot of money. The girl wasn't worried about finances at all. She was sure that in the future, when they started earning, they would be able to thank her. From the very beginning, Lee thought that she would want to invite them to her guild. He must have been too suspicious of her. A good attitude toward him, combined with a sense of gratitude, made him anxious. It gave the impression that there was some hidden meaning, not only because of how Darren was remembered, but also because the legendary Compson was her grandfather. After that, the daughter of the legendary warrior decided to ask where her friends bought their new weapons. If he introduced her to his weapons master, then in the future, the blacksmith would definitely be introduced to the holy sword. The meeting of the best hunter and the best blacksmith could really have a big impact on the world. The problem was that all this had to happen much later in the future, so this could again lead to the butterfly effect. A little later, they returned home and began preparing for their careers as hunters. Lee told Kira that he had introduced their weapons master to Darren. The girl wanted to change her weapons, so she needed a professional blacksmith. Lately, Lee had been thinking too much about the butterfly effect, and his anxiety had increased significantly because of it. When he heard the request to meet the blacksmith, he began to get incredibly worried. Then he felt a little better because he realized that Darren was actually a good person. She only did good things and brought goodness into the world. This was no longer the same Darren who was drowning in a sea of problems. Now this girl could be trusted. It should also be noted that Kira and Lee had not yet officially become hunters. They were preparing to start their careers, but for that, they needed to pass another exam. They hoped that everything would go well and that they would finally be able to make a living using their talents. Kira felt it was the perfect moment to thank her daughter's father for his help. He had put in a huge amount of effort to ensure she passed her first hunter exam. It was the first time Lee had seen her drunk. She must have been celebrating her victory too much. In any case, he was pleased to hear those words. They would still have time for such conversations after receiving their license. He couldn't even imagine that this conversation could lead to events that hadn't happened in his past life. But now we are transported to Kunak Mountain. The final stage of becoming a hunter is clearing an entry-level dungeon with random people. The final score depends on the hunter's ability to work as a team, so it is this aspect that will decide whether they receive a license or not. There will be two more guys on his team, the young man Soo and the more experienced Desho. They set out to clear the dungeon. They have 3 hours to do it, and they can only use one type of weapon. Before everything started, the guys were given half an hour to plan their strategy. Manso is a sorcerer, a rare gift that is highly valued in guilds, but Lee does not remember him at all from his past life. He had heard a little more about the warrior Daejo. This hunter loves to fight with his fiery fists and is not a fanatic about weapons. Now he has met a hunter who will be called the king of boxing in the future, but for now he is only at the beginning of his journey. At this point, their talents are not very important. They need to learn to work as a team because only thanks to this can they pass the test. It is necessary not only to discuss battle tactics but also to decide who will operate in which positions. If Lee wants to succeed, he needs to run this kindergarten because his partners are still too young. Soon, they entered the dungeon, and the entry-level quest began. Everyone chose a comfortable position for themselves. Manso would operate from behind thanks to his large attack radius, and Daejo would be ahead of the entire team. As everyone had already guessed, Lee would be inside, giving orders. He already knew that people panic when they first enter a dungeon, so he wasn't surprised when Manso asked to clear the place without him. Soon, he was persuaded to go on a sweep, but it was already clear that he could become the weak link in the team. This young wizard decided to start a conflict with the captain, but the captain doesn't like it when someone on the ship commits mutiny. He immediately made it clear to this Manso-look guy who was in charge so that similar problems would not arise in the future. He ordered the sorcerer to remove all the jewelry from his body, otherwise it would all end very badly. The referee was next to them. He noted the captain's confidence and immediately wrote down his characteristics in a notebook. Everyone around knew that Lee scored maximum points during the physical test last week, so it's better not to joke with him. They continued exploring the dungeon, but so far they hadn't encountered a single ant. Examiners may intentionally create atypical situations to assess the intelligence of participants. Soon, they saw something strange, a huge hole leading deep underground. Lee had not encountered anything like this when clearing the initial dungeons, so he immediately focused and tried to calm down. It would have been better if Manso had done exactly that, but this fool could not resist and began his journey into the abyss. The guys tried to save him and ordered him not to move. Now they would try to pull him up the mountain. This would be much easier to do if a huge ant monster hadn't appeared behind the sorcerer, in which case only the Ant-Man could help. The guys realized that now it would be too difficult to help their friend because the monster was taking him with it into the abyss. They had to jump into this hole and end up outside the exam just to save their friend. They were the first to enter the mysterious dungeon, so a special quest was started. Now they were required to clear out the antlion's lair. As soon as they realized they were in a mysterious dungeon, they immediately began to look in different directions and explore the area. Rumor has it that unusual situations can occur during exams, but considering the reaction of their judge, everything that happened was not planned. There was no air in this dungeon before Lee's regression, so the butterfly effect that Lee talks about so much must have worked again. Most likely, the sorcerer would be alive for some time because such monsters do not immediately kill their victims. The entrance to the mysterious dungeon was closed as soon as they got here, which could lead to even bigger problems. It was immediately noticeable that Daejo was shocked. He had never been in a real dungeon, and their team was inferior and too weak. If you clear this dungeon, you can get an elixir, a reward for clearing the mysterious dungeon. Every hunter knows that clearing a dungeon can yield various rewards. An elixir can be considered one of the best reward options. It enhances the hunter's physical abilities, which is why it is so desirable for Lee. Now, he was like jumping into a burning house, but it was not all that bad because their team included the king of boxing and a man from the future. The decision was made almost immediately. Lee said that they had to save the wizard no matter what it cost them. At that moment, he looked like a real hero from an anime. It's always nice to follow such a leader, even to the depths of the abyss. Soon, they moved forward to meet the adventure with confidence in their eyes. Their task was very simple. They needed to clear the dungeon and save Manso. Soon, they encountered the first ants. Their boss ate these monsters and turned them into his own zombie army. They didn't look incredibly dangerous, but you can't lose concentration when fighting them. Lee was a natural leader and a pleasure to watch. They soon began to feel each other out and fought as a true team, although it would be more accurate to call them a duo. After some time, they approached the lair of a huge monster. Most likely Manso was there. Although this guy looked like a fool, it was important to save him in order to successfully complete the task. They thought too much about saving their friend and completely forgot about their own safety. Lee began to attack the dungeon boss, but its armor was so powerful that it could not be penetrated with ordinary weapons. He had fought monsters thousands of times and spent a huge amount of time studying their strengths and weaknesses, so now he had to remember everything. He didn't have time. He needed to quickly understand his opponent's weak point and save Dash. The future king of boxing was very lucky to have such an experienced hunter by his side. By using the correct angle of attack, he was able to free his new comrade from the teeth of death. Now, they couldn't think about resting until the monster had escaped underground. They needed to finish it off. They were able to damage its eyes and antennae, but it wasn't enough to completely destroy the threat. To win, they needed to support each other. If Lee acted alone, he wouldn't succeed. Previously, everyone laughed at Diush. It was believed that only a fool could give up weapons and fight with his fists. He was rejected by various guilds and didn't want to take their teams. You could even say that this guy was a loser. Today, he found a person who believed in him and thought his fighting style was incredible. This person was Lee. Lee said that Daejo was the strongest hunter of all the insects he had seen, and this made Daejo work at his full potential. Now this huge ant lion had to feel the force of a double attack from the young hunters. Daejo's incredible physical strength was needed more than ever today. He had been waiting for his prime time for a long time and finally felt a taste of future success. This guy had turned into a real fighter against monsters. Sometimes it seemed like he didn't even have support. Using his physical strength, he did everything possible to leave the lower part of the monster unprotected. He created ideal conditions for his teammate to attack. Everything else was just a matter of technique. Lee understood that he was facing the future king of boxing. He could not hit his face in the dirt, so he had to demonstrate his talents as well. A few seconds later, he executed a technically perfect blow and cut the monster into 2 pieces. The system informed the boys that they were the first to defeat the antlion in the mysterious dungeon. The special quest had been completed. Now a reward and glory among young hunters awaited them. Soon, Lee and Kira came to the ministry and received their long-awaited hunting licenses. Even though the job was done, Lee didn't look very happy because he understood that these were just the first steps on a long journey. He saw his bracelet start to glow again, meaning a source of mana appeared somewhere nearby. But the siren didn't work again. He began to panic, just like Kira. Strange things were happening around them, so trouble awaited them again. Before that, Sora looked upset. It turned out that her mother didn't let her eat the lollipop and thus upset her daughter. It's hard to believe, but now this surge of energy was connected to Sora. It seemed she had finally decided to get what she wanted, like the story of a ruined house and the cretin bull that destroyed it. This girl's magic was getting out of control. Soon they returned home and put their daughter to bed. It was time to talk about what had happened from the very beginning. They couldn't even imagine that their daughter wasn't that capable, but now they had to decide what to do with Sora's talents. Lee decided to dig deeper and find out what happened when their house was destroyed, which led to this situation. Kira said that she and her daughter had an unpleasant conversation that day because Sora wanted to find her father. Hearing that she would never see him again, she began to cry, and then the house was destroyed. Now that it was clear why Kira decided to find Lee, this puzzle became even clearer. Today, her antics didn't lead to disaster, but it was immediately clear that the little girl had enough strength as if she were an experienced sorceress. Lee already knows that in the future, Sora will become a very serious threat to humanity, but he is confident that he can change the future. His daughter has no control over her power at all, but this energy is activated by strong emotions. Of course, this is all just speculation, but due to strong emotions, Sora's mana becomes uncontrollable. They needed to decide immediately what to do. If they didn't intervene in the process, someone would definitely get hurt. In his past life, Sora's strength grew just as quickly, and his father also didn't know what to do. He was left without a wife and was busy with work, so sometimes he didn't even notice his daughter's growing energy. Honestly, he didn't even suspect that this could go too far, but now he understood something. One of the reasons Sora's magic is strengthened is because she is located where there is too little mana. If they took her to a place where there was enough mana, the situation might improve. There are only two such places in the world, a dungeon and a battlefield. It's obvious that Mom is against such excursions. It's incredibly dangerous and something terrible could happen at any moment. Her father is also afraid to take her to such dangerous